Sleepy Sharks. It's Miss Amanda from the library. February 16th is Fat Tuesday, also known as Mardi Gras. Let's learn how they celebrate down in New Orleans with the Bourbon Street Band is back. The Bourbon Street Band is back. Keep the music in your heart. Bobcat Bob. Written by Ed Shankman, illustrated by Dave O'Neill. Ever since the caveman hummed, the mermaids sang, and the natives drummed, there's been music in the air, and you could find it anywhere. Bands were roaming near and far, from Mexico to Zanzibar, from Iceland to the Ivory Coast, and all the places you like most. There were bands in Greece and France, and anywhere that folks could dance. Just find a map and pick a spot. There was no place that bands were not. And though the bands were very good, in every land and neighborhood, the very best would make their way to New Orleans in the USA. That is where the great bands met, and one was even better yet. It was the grandest of the grand, Bobcat Bob and his Bourbon Street Band. The Bobcat wore a cool French hat. He wore it forward, straight and flat. When someone wears a hat like that, you know that must be one cool cat. He had hatitude and catitude. While Bobcat Bob attacked the drums, a snapping turtle snapped his thumbs. Warblers warbled, catbirds meowed, kingbirds led, and the cowbirds mooed. On the horns were 3 raccoons, a crawfish, and a pair of loons. On several of the lighter tunes, a frog sat in to play the spoons. To help old Bobcat keep the pace, a gator played the stand-up bass. Those players really rocked the place as sweat poured down that gator's face. Those who heard them say they played like lightning mixed with lemonade. And that, I think you would agree, is just as good as song can be. When players play like that, you know, word's bound to spread about the show. Soon people came from miles around to hear them make their special sound. The band played fast and it played loud. The louder it played, the bigger the crowd. A song might start out sweet and mild. Then came the drums and the crowd went wild. I wish you'd seen them on the stage. Back then, when they were all the rage, they played like wind, they played like fire. They raised the roof and raised it higher. They played all night and weren't done till morning came, and they raised the sun. They raised it up with a sound so bright, it washed away the dark of night. Not every band can raise the sun, but one that can is lots of fun. So people cheered with sheer delight, and somehow all the world seemed right. That is until a certain show, one certain night not long ago, when halfway through a happy song, it seemed that something went quite wrong. The music stopped. There was no sound. The people gasped and looked around. Somehow it seemed a change had come that stopped the bass and hushed the drum. It hushed the loons and 3 raccoons. It hushed the frog who played the spoons. And all the others on the stage were silent as an empty page. Then Bobcat Bob took off his hat and left the stage in seconds flat. And just like that, without a choice, the great New Orleans lost its voice. And with the music went the sun. Without the band, it came undone. It slid back down below the ground, and darkness rose up all around. The whole world watched as silence came, and all agreed it was a shame. What was the cause? Who was to blame? Would New Orleans ever be the same? For months, the sun stayed out of sight. And through those months of endless night, through all the time that darkness stayed, no songs were heard, no notes were played. Of course, without a music show, the people had no place to go. They stayed at home and locked the door and wished that things were like before. Now life is strange and things can change. Sometimes they simply rearrange. Some go from good to bad, it's true. but they can change for the better too. And that is what occurred the day that music found a way to play. It started with a single beat, tap. They heard it out on Bourbon Street, then another tap, then a third tap, and then they say a fourth was heard, tap. Out in the dark, these beats were beaten, some just once and some repeated. It was like a drum. There was no doubt a drum was calling people out. Tap, 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 tap. A drum was saying, come out here, ignore the dark and have no fear. The people heard it loud and clear and soon began to gather near. Tap, tap, tippity tap, 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 tippity tap, 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 tippity tap. And who do you suppose they found pounding out that drumming sound? Was that a cat in a cool French hat? It was Bobcat Bob they were looking at. And as the drum picked up the pace, the gator joined with his stand-up bass. Soon the horns began to blare, and then sweet voices filled the air. And somewhere just behind the loom, there seemed to be sounds of spoons. These players clearly had the knack. Bob and his Bourbon Street band were back. In fact, the band seemed even more exciting than it was before. The notes were sweet and strong and clear. They shook the heart. They kissed the ear. They rose those notes like flames and sparks. They floated through the streets and parks. They reached so high and went so far, you could have heard them on a star. And what was that off to the right? What thing could be so big and bright? It lit the sky and warmed the air. What was that giant thing up there? The sun, they cried, and it was true. At last the sun was shining through, a brilliant ray that brought the day and made the darkness run away. Now other bands were playing too, and bigger crowds came into view as thousands danced and sang along in a great parade of sun and song. Now bands took turns and people cheered. They cheered each time a band appeared. They clapped for every song they knew and then for every new one too. It's good to cheer with all your might. And those folks clapped a lot that night. But the biggest hand in all the land went to Bobcat Bob and his Bourbon Street band.